Today I'll be making a simple macro that will measure how long it takes to update your queries. You could then output this in a cell in order to prepare the user for how long it took last time, so they have an idea of how long it will take this time. The query is simple. It uses this function invoke after function. I did not come up with this function myself. I got this from someone else from this post. So it's a function that invokes a function after a period of time has elapsed. In this case, I'm outputting an empty function that takes no arguments, and the output of that function is then a table with the column weight and the value 0. This is simply because I need to output something in order to have my wait period. In this case, you could have this be the last step if you for some reason need to wait 2 seconds, which is what I'm doing, but I simply needed some kind of query that had to actually take time. In order to use the active workbook.refreshAll method in VBA, I need to turn off background updating. And I believe in Excel 365 you can go to the workbook queries pane and hit properties, and then you can turn it off here. But in Excel 2016 you need to go to the table tools pane up on the top and hit properties, and then hit that little button. And here I can say disable background refresh. Otherwise, when I run the code active workbook.refreshAll, it will actually skip to the next line in the code, which means it'll start figuring out how much time has passed before actually updating. I would suggest adding this code to your personal macro book. That way you'll be able to call the function in any workbook. Of course, then only you can call the function. So you might want to save it inside the workbook. I need a few variables. Start needs to be a variant because it will be a time. And if I don't explicitly state the type, it will become a variant, which is normally expensive, so you probably shouldn't do it. I also need to count the minutes and seconds, which can be byte, because minutes can only be 60 and seconds can only be 59. I start out the code by setting my start variable to be equal to the current time, which will then output the amount of seconds that have passed since 0 o'clock today, which you can then divide by 60 to get minutes and 60 again to get hours. So 17.36 hours have passed since midnight. You could make this a long date type if you don't care about milliseconds, which you probably don't. At least I think that's milliseconds. You could make it long instead and save like 12 bytes, but I think I can live with it. And then the code is simply active workbook.refreshAll. You could also say I only want to update a specific query, which you'd want to do if you have multiple queries and maybe you have a query that needs to update all the data and then you can do other stuff afterwards. Maybe that query takes minutes and the others don't take as long. Now the query has updated and I can say, and I actually want another, which will store the difference between the start timer and the end timer, which will then be difference. And I want this to be an integer because I don't care about milliseconds. So timer, which will take the current time when this line executes, and then minus start, which in this case will give it 2 seconds. The minute portion will then be integer division, which will be the difference, which is in seconds, divided by 60. In this case, this is going to give 0, because my query will only take 2 seconds to execute. And the seconds will then be the difference minus the amount of minutes that have passed. Difference, which I've already turned into an integer to get rid of milliseconds, then minus the amount of minutes times 60. And then I want to save the workbook. After updating it, you could choose to not do this, which I don't want to do because then I'd have to save it and all, and I don't need to. Then I simply want a message box that pops up, and then input my variables. And if you really want to, you could also say that if the amount of minutes is equal to 0, then you don't want to insert this portion. But I think that's overkill for something this simple. And I spelled that wrong. So this takes 2 seconds, and then you get, yeah, it took 2 seconds. So that's pretty neat, I think. Especially the function invoke after function in Power Query, which I'll show in the next episode, where I do this, measuring how long it takes to update Power Query without using VBA. But yep,